Guys, today we're gonna take this brand new 8S EXB Kraton and turn it into the largest, most powerful, and probably most expensive Arrma in the world. And to do that, we're gonna use this gorgeous new Mega Kraton XL chassis from M2C. This thing is full 1/5 scale, but that's not all. Because we're also gonna be installing every single upgrade I could find for it, as well as the Castle Cobra 5 and this massive 520 kV motor. Before we get started, I wanna mention that this chassis, along with some of the parts to go along with it, are prototypes. And they've been made specifically to accommodate this giant new Castle can. The awesome side effect of this is that this new chassis is several inches longer than the stock chassis. And lining it up with the chassis on this 1/5 scale buggy, you can see they are exactly the same length. Meaning if this works, we're gonna have the first true 1/5 scale Arrma ever. Of course, to do that and to handle all that power, we're gonna have to do a ton of upgrades to this truck. The very first step though is to get everything stripped down, so let's get started. A big upgrade like this can seem really intimidating, but as long as you stay organized and take it one step at a time, it really isn't that bad. The first step is we're gonna take all the screws out of this chassis. And in order to stay organized, I've cut this vaguely chassis-shaped piece of cardboard out, and we're just gonna put the screws in this cardboard as we go. I'm just gonna take a little screwdriver and punch a couple holes basically where they went on the car, and then put the screws in. As you can see, they're a little off center, but that doesn't matter. Once you get all the screws in here, the orientation of everything kind of makes itself apparent. Since we're gonna be taking all the screws out of this chassis, one thing you can do that really helps is to take all the similar screws out at once. We've got 4 here and 4 back here that are probably all gonna be the same size. Though in this case, surprise, surprise, 7 were identical, but one of them was a little bit longer. That one went in this corner, and it had a nut on the back. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch that one first, put the bolt through, and then reattach the nut. Then we can quickly punch our other 7 holes, put those 7 screws in, and that way when it comes time to put it back together, we'll know exactly which one the odd man out was. You don't have to actually put all the screws in the cardboard. If you hear something fall out like this rear battery tray, you can just go ahead and put the screws back in it. And that's another really easy way to know exactly where they came from when it comes time to put everything back together. And now that we have this out, I want to mention the other really important thing about a big project like this. Give yourself a nice open area to put all the parts that come off. Make it someplace that isn't going to get disturbed, and that way you can stay really organized as things go back together. One of the most intimidating things about a project like this, and potentially frustrating things, is not knowing where things go when it comes time for reassembly. However, it's also worth noting that if you get a screw in the wrong place, it's usually not the end of the world, and you usually figure it out pretty quickly. And even though this is going to end up being a very expensive toy car, keep in mind it is still just a toy car. This is a hobby and it's supposed to be fun. Let's keep it fun. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit intimidated by this project. I've never done an upgrade on an 8S Kraton, and this is going to be the most powerful basher I've ever put together. And even though I've been doing this for a very long time, the chances of something going wrong are not zero, and keeping that in mind can also help prevent frustration when something does eventually go wrong. As we keep going, more parts are going to fall off the other side, such as these side pods and the fronts of the battery trays. You can either wait and deal with them all at once, though I personally prefer to go ahead and take them, get them away from the car and get them organized so they're not in the way. And for efficiency's sake, since everything's coming out of this chassis, I think it's best to take all the screws with the same head type out at once. And you want to make sure you have good screws. These Gen 2 MIP bits are amazing. I've been using this same Gen 1 MIP bit for years, and it works really, really well and doesn't wear out. And yeah, we're definitely going to be giving a set of these away during our 50K giveaway, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss winning one of these. Of course, now to get the rest of these big boy 8S screws out, we need to switch to a big boy driver and a 4mm bit. And the nice thing about this particular truck is that all of these larger screws are the exact same length. So technically you don't really need to put them in the cardboard, but we've got the cardboard and it really does help things stay organized. So we're going to keep using it. And then of course, if you're like me, you're guaranteed to miss at least one. Now with every single screw removed from the chassis, unfortunately, it's still not quite free. And that's because on most cars, the front and rear end will be clamped between the bumper and the bulkhead. Obviously, these screws aren't from the chassis, so they don't go in the cardboard, and that's where these little Ziploc bags come in very, very handy. I'm just gonna label this F bump, and while this might seem like overkill, when it comes time to put it together, especially if it's been a couple of weeks, it's not gonna feel that way then. Now pulling this front bumper off releases the front of the chassis, and with just 2 more screws in the rear, This entire chassis plate lifts straight off, leaving the rest of the mechanical bits behind. The very first thing you want to do once you take a chassis off is go ahead and wipe as much of the grease off it as possible. This thing's definitely going to end up getting set somewhere where that grease is going to make a mess, and a minute of cleaning right now is going to save you a bunch of trouble down the road. With that stock chassis off, we can see just how much longer the M2C upgrade is. This thing's going to be a monster. If all you're doing is a chassis swap, from here installation is just the reverser removal and you're halfway done. Of course, we're going to go way further than that because the stock motor looks pretty big, but next to what we're going to be putting in, it looks like a little toy, and we're going to need some serious hardware to handle this serious power. For now, though, the next step is to go ahead and get this thing separated out into modules. In this case, it's fairly easy as all these braces are held in with clips. So we just need to pull the clips out and push the pins through. I'm going to go ahead and put these right back in the braces so I don't lose them. Now we just do that for the rest of them, and the whole thing splits apart into 3 much more manageable modules. The biggest unknown in this prototype setup is going to be mounting up this giant castle motor, so let's go ahead and check that out first. Obviously, we're not going to be using the stock motor or the stock ESC here. These things do have a decent amount of power, but probably not enough power for the extra weight we're going to have with that giant chassis we're putting on it. Though we might be keeping this new Spectrum S6510 servo. One thing we are going to upgrade on it is the servo saver. I got this no-name Amazon brand servo saver that looked pretty good and had decent reviews. I have no idea if it's going to be even as good as the stock one, but we're going to give it a shot. A lot of times when I show these Amazon special upgrades, you guys ask me what brand they are, and I don't usually give a brand because, as you can see here, this is Vigu Hobby, and the reality is you'll be able to find this exact same part under several different brands, and those brands tend to change all the time, so there's not really any reason to give you the brand that I bought. If you just look for the part that appears the same as this, you'll probably get the same part regardless of what brand it is. This stock ESC is held on by 4 screws and double-sided tape. That seems a little bit like overkill to me, but at least it's not going to fly off on you. Wow, guys, I just struggled for like 5 minutes to get that off. I don't know what kind of double-sided tape they're using, but it's even stronger than the VHB I normally use. In the end, it didn't even let go of either side. It actually just ripped apart in the middle. This is really good stuff. Pulling the receiver lid off, you can see we do have an SR6200 receiver in here, and it comes with a DX3, which I'll also probably continue to use. These 1/5 scale servos are usually built fairly differently from the standard servos we see in most RTRs. This thing's got a metal case. These pretty large screws do have O-rings on them for waterproofing. And then under the cover, all we can really see is the back of a circuit board. We do have 2 contacts going to a big brushed motor here, and an O-ring for waterproofing on the bottom of the case. And then removing the top cover, we can see we have a steel and brass gear train. Most of the gears are steel, but the first gear is brass. That's not a big deal because the first gear doesn't take a bunch of torque. Each one of these gears is a gear reduction, which means it has to handle more torque than the gear before it, which is why the teeth get bigger and bigger as you go. Overall, this looks pretty good. We've got a couple brass bushings here and an O-ring for sealing. And yeah, I think we're going to give this thing a try on the Mega XL 1/5 scale Kraton. Will it survive? I don't know. We'll find out. One thing you'll want to be really careful with if you're doing a mod like this yourself is taking these screws out. These are the original cheese grade motor mount screws that Arrma used for a long time, and for some reason are still using in this, and they tend to strip out really easily, especially when there's a bunch of thread locker on them. I recommend taking these out by hand to start before using power tools. Actually, removing the bottom one, I can see why they're probably still using them. This area here is pretty shallow, and they probably need these low profile head screws in order to clear it, though they still could use the new ones on the top. With this motor off the mount, we can get a really good view of just how much bigger the motor we're putting in is. This 5687 motor isn't tiny, but it certainly looks tiny compared to this giant castle can. I've got some upgrades we're going to be doing to the center power module, but before we do, I need to make sure that the motor is actually going to fit on the new motor mount and on the new chassis. This new castle motor has a bunch of mounting options, and the M2C mount actually uses 3 screw holes, which should be really strong for the front at least. But for something as big and heavy as this motor, rear support's pretty much also going to be a requirement. And that's where this cool little guy is going to come into play. After temporarily installing the motor in the chassis, you can see we've got a little bit of play between it and the plate. This wedge will fit in that space, and it's going to be held down by this big hose clamp. These hose clamps aren't the most elegant thing in the world, but they are very, very strong and should work really well in this situation. And then to mount that, we've got this cool adjustable 2-block arrangement, but unfortunately, it looks like we've got a problem here. It's a little difficult to show on camera, but this upper block's actually contacting the motor housing, and that's happening because of what's going on here in the front of the motor. As you can see, we're using a square hole pattern for mounting, but this front end bell goes on with a 6-hole pattern. That means depending on how this is clocked in the factory, those square holes can wind up in different different places. And it looks like this upper mount was designed to fit inside this little notch right here, which of course is in the wrong place on mine. These types of issues are all part of prototyping, but it means for now we're gonna have to put the motor mount to the side. That's not a problem though, because while we're waiting, we've still got a ton of awesome upgrades to do. And let's start those by stripping down this beast of a front end. I have to say, I love my X-platform vehicles. The X-Maxx and the XRT are some of my favorite bashers, but every time I work on one of these 8S Arrmas, I'm reminded of just how much more substantial everything feels. Of course, these trucks are a lot heavier, so they have to be a lot more substantial in order to not break. But to make these shocks even more substantial, we're going to install the awesome M2C shock kit. As opposed to the stock shock shafts, which are only 6mm in diameter, these ones are a full 7mm in diameter. That might not seem like a big difference, but these shock shafts are going to be a lot stronger. This upgrade has quite a few steps, but it is fairly straightforward. First, we're going to just pop these springs off. We're not going to be reusing these stock springs. This truck's going to be a lot heavier, so I went ahead and got these upgraded springs. Again, these are a random Amazon special. These aren't even branded, but if you just look on Amazon for 8S Kraton springs, you'll find these. Whether or not they're going to work well is something we're going to have to find out once we get it together and actually bash it. Because this shock is brand new, I'm going to go ahead and save the shock fluid. If your shock is older, that's a judgment call you're going to have to make based on how the shock fluid looks. But as long as it's not too dirty, you can probably reuse it. And now we just need to take it the rest of the way apart. I'm doing this over a little paper bowl just to keep things as clean as possible. You don't want to get too much dirt inside one of these shocks, and everything's going to have fluid on it, so it's going to be kind of messy. Fortunately, these big shocks are pretty easy to work on just because of how large they are. With that nut off, the shaft comes right out of the bottom. Then we can pop the bottom cap off. You might need a pair of pliers for this, as they can be very tight. This cap is loaded with the seals, but it's too small for the larger shaft, so we won't be reusing it. And since we're also going to be using their zero rebound shock pistons, the only thing we're going to be keeping is the shock body, the preload adjustment collar, the lower spring perch, and the piston nut. And if you're planning on keeping parts that have been in grease or shock oil, putting them in a separate little baggie is a great idea. If you put them in with stuff that isn't oily, that stuff's gonna get oily. First step to reassembly is gonna be putting these aluminum rod ends on these big shock rods. While I'm screwing this down, I just realized that if I haven't hit 50K by the time you watch this video, I'm gonna hit 50K during the release of this video, so let's start those 50K giveaways right now. And thanks to M2C, we're gonna start with a bang, so stay tuned. I'll tell you more about that in just a few minutes. We've got that on, and we've got the grub screw locked down. This grub screw sticking out so far might seem like a mistake, but it actually serves dual purposes. It locks the shaft on, but it also holds the spring perch in place, so that's by design. The next step's a little bit more involved, but still pretty easy. We're gonna load up these new bottom caps. First thing we're gonna do is take one of these orange silicone O-rings. I like to add a little bit of udder butter to it, pop that in, drop a spacer in on top of it, another O-ring. There's enough grease in there for that O-ring as well, which we're gonna screw down evenly with these little screws. I definitely recommend doing this by hand, as small screws in plastic can be really easy to strip out. I also recommend not tightening them all the way right now, but go ahead and put the shock shaft through and then tighten them up. Again, tighten them up evenly so you don't get anything crossed up, and you want to go just until they stop. If you've done it right and used grease, there should be a small amount of drag, but not too much, and those are going to seal up perfectly. Now we add our big O-ring to the outside and load her up into the shock body. As you tighten this down the last little bit, you want to make sure the O-ring actually goes into the shock. There should be plenty of fluid in there to help lubricate it, but if you see it starting to squirt out around this edge, make sure you stop and get it in there. Otherwise, it's definitely not going to seal up. And then it's best to follow up with a pair of pliers and just give it a little bit of a nip like that, and that's good to go. Since we're working on the front shocks, we're going to use the white pistons. We're going to use it with the slots down. Those slots and these O-rings slow down rebound, which really help with bouncing when you're landing big jumps. And we just put the nut back on and dump our fluid back in. We are not going to get this thing completely full with the fluid we are recycling, simply because there's no way to get all the fluid out of here, so we're going to have to top it up with something. To top it up, I'm going to use this 600 CST, which is about 47.5 weight. Stock is 40 weight, I believe, but we're going to have a heavier truck here, so we want to go a little bit thicker on the fluid. Unfortunately, there is no direct conversion from CST to weight. CST stands for centistokes, which is an actual measurement of viscosity. Weight is just a marketing term, and it varies depending on what brand you get, but you can get pretty close using some conversion charts online. I'm just going to pump the air out of here. It's a toy, so we're not going to be perfect about it. Top it off, put our cap most of the way on, finding the bleed hole right here, and then we're going to push our shock shaft all the way up. If you've done this right and there's enough fluid in there, you should get a bunch of fluid out of that bleed hole. If all you get is air, then you didn't have enough fluid in it to begin with, and you're going to end up with excess air. So making a mess kind of is the goal, unfortunately. Looks like I might have used a little too much fluid though. As far as I'm concerned, the goal is to have as little rebound as possible. As you can see, we've got a little bit here, which is always going to happen because as as you tighten the cap up, once it gets past that bleeder, it's going to pressurize the inside, and as the shock shaft goes in, it takes up space. I think the less rebound, the better, because you really don't want to be pressurizing the inside of your shock and risking blowing out your seals or even just leaking past them. This feels just about perfect. And now we just need to install our upgraded spring, which I really wish wasn't gold, but function over form, and then put on our lower perch, which is really tight and I might have to do off camera. And that is one fully upgraded shock for a full 1/5 scale truck. When you're doing upgrades, you want to make sure you pay attention to the labeling on the packages, because as you can see, this says rear on it. And again, just as an example, I didn't do this as a mistake. I went ahead and put the rear shock shaft in the front shock. So to continue the example, I'm going to go ahead and swap it out for the front shock shaft. Now, of course, I'm kidding about having done that on purpose, but the reality is mistakes are going to happen no matter what job you're doing. They'll definitely happen when you're doing a big job like this, and that's okay. It's all part of the experience. I do wish I didn't make my mistakes on the messiest part of the project, but if I got to choose where I made my mistakes, I would probably choose not to make any at all. Now let me get the other front one upgraded, just like that. And I gotta say, this gold is kind of growing on me. Hopefully it's gonna match the new body we use on this truck, because given that the truck's gonna be several inches longer than it is stock, this original body's not gonna work anymore. We'll talk more about that body in a few minutes, but first we need to finish beefing up this drivetrain to handle all that extra power. The first step to that, of course, is going to be upgrading this differential. These differentials are pretty strong out of the box with a big, beefy spiral bevel ring and pinion gear, but there's one place they can really be upgraded, and that's the differential case. Because no matter how strong your gears are, and in this case they are pretty darn strong, they're dependent on proper mesh for that strength. If you've only got half the tooth engaging, you've only got half the tooth strength. Having anything flexible in the system, even slightly flexible like this plastic case, can allow gears to spread apart, especially gears like this where they have an axial component to their thrust. And when gears spread apart, that's when things start breaking. So to stiffen it up and help prevent that, we're going to use this RC all-wheel drive combination aluminum steel diff case. In theory, this should be a lot stiffer than the stock plastic option and should make the whole differential stronger, even though we're not upgrading the gears. We are, however, going to be upgrading the outdrives to match these giant mega CVDs, which will hopefully be able to handle 12S power with that big can from Castle. Swapping this over is pretty straightforward. Just need to pull the parts out of the old housing. If you're careful, you can keep this all as one unit and then pull the bottom gear out of here. This is where having a hook like this is really handy because it tends to get stuck. Then in order to get the cross pin out, we do need to take this little grub screw out of here. And we just poke the pin out of the hole left behind by that. We can pull our stock cup off and our stock bearing off, which is the part we actually need. As you can see, these stock plastic housings do have steel output sleeves, but the plastic itself is still going to flex more than aluminum will. And just like with the shock parts, we're going to go ahead and put this housing in a bag so it doesn't make everything else greasy and messy. Assembling the new housing is a little bit different because it comes in multiple parts. This actually makes it easier. First thing we need to do is make sure we put our bearing on. Don't forget your bearing. I do it all the time. Then we put our new output cup on. You can see just how much bigger it is and how much bigger the slot for the pin is. That's because the pin on the shaft is also larger, making it quite a bit stronger. And then after adding just a little bit of grease to this, we'll slide that into the new housing plate. Fits nicely. Install our seal. And then this housing comes with different washers, so we're going to go ahead and use them. I'm not sure why they're different. They actually seem a little bit thinner, but they put them in there for a reason, so we will use them. And we just put our cross pin in. Again, this is a lot easier than having to do it down inside a differential housing. I've always wondered why they have these tabs on the side gears of the 8S trucks. They don't have a limited slip option as far as I'm aware, but if you know why those tabs are there, let me know down in the comments. Now we're going to add a washer and put our housing on. The housing does have pins on one side. That's to match up with the ring gear, so we're going to put it pin side up, and then we just install our screws with thread locker. You do want to be very careful when installing these. Make sure you don't get any differential fluid down in these holes or in these holes because it will stop the thread locker from working properly and your diff will fall apart on you. And now again, if you're careful, you should be able to drop this entire cross section in as one unit, just like that. And we're going to fill this up with some 100K fluid. I've had a lot of people ask me what fluids they should use in various different vehicles. And the reality is it's impossible for me to tell you. What fluid's going to be best for you depends on your bashing style, where you bash, how much power you have, gearing, tires, and a ton of other variables. So the best thing to do is just start with stock. That's what we're going with here at 100K. And then mess around with it and see what you like on your particular vehicle and with your own driving preferences. While that's settling, we'll go ahead and switch over the output cup on this side. I am going to swap out the stock shim for the one that came with the case. Again, I'm sure they did it for a reason. And pop this back together. That level looks pretty good just above the cross pins, so now we just reassemble. And with that, it's fully assembled and looking good. It feels nice and smooth too. Will this handle the power? We're just gonna have to find out. To go along with those outputs, we've also got much beefier CVDs. As you can see, these things are huge. And to go along with those, we got some extended hexes from Just Bash It. Overall, these are gonna make the truck about an inch wider, which should go perfect with that extra length of that extended chassis. Speaking of strength, this 7075B block is going to be a lot stronger than the plastic stock one. Typically, manufacturers can get away with using plastic on the B and C blocks because there's not as much stress on them in a crash. But there is a lot of outward force on the pins in the front, which is why this M2C unit is made out of steel. I don't think this is going to be breaking anytime soon, even with those hex extenders. To attach the arms, we're going to be using these M2C hardened steel hinge pins. The stock ones are also hardened steel, but these are going to be higher quality and should be quite a bit less prone to getting bent. We are still using the stock arms, and this probably will end up being the weak point, but if we use the RPM arms, it could end up causing problems with those new axle shafts, because these shafts are less flexible and the RPM arms are more flexible, meaning you can actually get binding and breakage if you use them in combination, and these stock arms are generally reasonably good anyway. The last thing we're going to be replacing is the entire steering system here. The stock one is plastic, and we're going to go to aluminum, which will definitely be stronger. These toe links are only supported in single shear, but they have this big nut on the outside that actually prevents the link from popping off. I'd prefer them be in double shear from the factory, but this is a reasonable compromise, and it does help prevent failure. Swapping this over is easy. We just take apart the old one and put together the new one. And with all that shiny goodness on there, we can reinstall the shock tower, our super fancy shocks, and then finally we need to upgrade these stock plastic pillow ball retainers with these nice aluminum ones from M2C. Unlike the nylon on the stock units, these have Delrin inserts, which will be a lot slicker and probably will last a lot longer. I do wonder if we'll see the new pillow ball retainer design on an upgraded 8S truck at some point. Even though they aren't adjustable on the 6S trucks, the entire knuckle design is a lot stronger, and it would be nice to see those same updates happen to this platform as well. And with that, guys, this front end is done, and I think it looks really, really cool. And the gold springs are even starting to grow on me. Hopefully they're going to match the body. We'll find that out in just a few minutes. But now moving on to the transmission, we've got a couple upgrades we need to do here to handle that power. And actually, now that I'm feeling it, maybe just one upgrade. I was going to put thicker center differential fluid in this, but I can't actually move these output cups by hand, meaning the fluid in here is already very thick. I was under the impression it was a lot thinner on these. Maybe they upgraded it on the latest EXB version. So the only thing we need to do is upgrade this gear. We're going to be swapping the stock sintered steel Mod 1 gear out for a hot racing Mod 1.5 gear. I'm not sure if this is completely necessary, but I like Mod 1.5, so that's what we're going with. Well, that was easy. We can always come back and add thicker center differential fluid if we need to. For now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this cover off just so I can keep an eye on these gears. Again, it's an easy thing to put back on if we need to. I did get word that the replacement prototype rear support brace for the motor is on its way. While we wait for that, we can go ahead and get the motor mount installed on here. But wait, don't screw it down just yet. I always forget this piece. I'm pretty sure I've had to pull this back apart on every single one of these upgrades I've done because the screws go in from the back. Now that all the 8S trucks come with an aluminum version of this mount, upgrading it probably isn't necessary, but we've got it, so we might as well use it. There we go. This thing's ready for the motor, and it's ready to go on that beautiful new chassis. And of course, this is where our big piece of cardboard with all the screws in it is going to come in really handy, because aside from one custom screw that comes with the mount, we're going to be reusing everything that came on the original car. Of course, don't forget to add thread lock to anything going into aluminum, otherwise it will rattle loose eventually. And now we can drop our upgraded front end on here. And this thing's starting to look really mean. By the way, if you're using an impact gun to put this together, make sure you're really, really careful. This thing can strip out plastic very easily. I always recommend finishing up all screws by hand, so don't do what I'm doing. Speaking of don't do what I'm doing, I need to take this transmission back off because I forgot to put the center brace on and it goes underneath the trans. This M2C chassis uses a bunch of bracing that the original chassis didn't use, and that's for a couple of really good reasons. The first one is that it's longer, and the second one is that it actually omits this steel brace right here. Funny story about this steel brace, when the first 8S Kraton came out, they didn't have this brace, and the chassis wasn't 7075 aluminum, and they bent really, really easily. Some of the first reviewers bent their chassis on the first jump. They very quickly went back, reinforced the chassis, and then added this brace, which really did help. Of course, because our chassis is going to be longer, we can't use this brace. So instead we get this aluminum center spine, these two smaller aluminum side braces, and then these two massive steel braces to go on top. With all that installed and the center transmission put back in, we've only got one more major module to upgrade. And that's this rear end, but this is going to be exactly the same as the front end. I don't feel like doing it, and you probably don't feel like watching it, so instead, let me tell you about the giveaway we're doing. We're going to be hitting 50K during this video, and M2C is giving away a $250 gift card to whoever wins. But in order to win and to help me finish this rear end, you've got to be subscribed. If enough of you guys subscribe right now, when I snap my fingers, this is going to be done. Okay, we need some more people to subscribe, $250 gift card, and Perfect, we did it. Now, if you didn't get that subscribe button hit in time, that's fine. Go ahead and hit it now. Leave any comment down in the comment section. Make sure you like the video, and you're gonna be entered to win that $250 gift card from M2C. All right, let's get this thing installed. But wait, before we do that and make this thing even bigger, the new adapter for the rear of the motor came in. This actually sits differently on the motor, and I had to drill some new holes in order to install it. Of course, you won't have to do that because they'll already be pre-drilled. Another thing I need to do that you won't have to do, though you might want to in this case, is take these wires and angle them up instead of out. This motor can's really long, and having these wires stick out even further isn't convenient, and on this prototype actually makes them run into the steering rack. That's going to be fixed in the final version, but again, you might want to rotate them up if you've got the capability to do so. And by capability, I mean you're going to need a soldering iron with a high thermal capacity. There is a lot of thermal mass in these connections, and if you don't have a really powerful soldering iron, you're not going to be able to do this. Even this 300-watt iron I'm using right now is kind of struggling to get these connections unsoldered. I was just barely able to do that, but you're going to need some serious hardware if you want to make a good connection while resoldering these. After how much I just struggled, I would definitely recommend not doing it unless you really know what you're doing. With that done, we can get the motor installed. As you can see, the rear support's going to go right here at the very front of the car, and it has plenty of adjustment to accommodate whatever pinion gear you decide to use. I haven't settled on a pinion yet. This motor has half the kV of the original motor, but we're going to be running a 50% higher voltage, so gearing can be a little bit hard to figure out. The rear support's going to attach to the motor using this worm-style hose clamp. That fits into a recess in the chassis, and while it's not the most elegant solution in the world, it should be very effective, as these hose clamps are pretty strong. Getting this motor installed has me really excited to see what this thing's going to look like and to see what it can do, so let's get the rest of the chassis put together. By reinstalling the electronics box and the Cobra 5 HV ESC, as you can see, this mounts on a plate that actually goes over the box, but mounts to the chassis around it in the front and rear. Though to install it, you do have to remove all the protrusions off the top of that box lid. Oh, and don't worry, this thing's gonna be awesome because the blood sacrifice has been made. Now we just need to install the rear module just like the front. And then after installing the central tower, we can get our braces installed. These braces do include extensions for the front and rear. This thing's so big, I'm actually running out of room on my bench. So let me get this installed and the battery trays done, and let's take a closer look at the body and how we're gonna mount it. And here's what we're going with. This is a Red Cat Vigilante body. This is just about perfect for this really long chassis. The front body mounts should work just fine in their stock position, but for the rears, I actually flipped them over and moved them up. This gives us quite a bit more height in the rear. That's gonna give us plenty of adjustment to get the body level, and I think we can even still run the rear wing. This thing's gonna look awesome. Let me get this painted up and I'll show you what it looks like. And here she is, guys, the world's largest, most powerful, and probably most expensive Arrma. I think she came out absolutely gorgeous. Everything's done inside. The brace is all set to go. I went ahead and went with a 26-tooth pinion gear. That's mod 1.5 with a 30-tooth spur gear. This has been an absolutely epic build, but now it's time to go see what this beast can do on 12S. At over 40 pounds with batteries, 36 inches long, and over 25 inches wide, this is the largest and heaviest RC car I've ever driven. It's pretty crazy that we're driving the biggest car we've ever driven this time, and we drove the fastest car we ever drove last time. Let's see how fast this thing is. Full throttle. Okay, all right, pretty quick, not too bad. Oh my God, this thing is an absolute monster. All right, let's run it back. Here we go. Full throttle. All right, let's see what we got. I have to say, one thing I definitely noticed is that the steering servo is not adequate. This thing weighs way more than it did stock, and the steering servo just can't keep up. However, at 55 miles an hour, this thing is definitely plenty fast enough, and I'm sure with more gearing, we could make it go faster, but let's see how it bashes. Now, obviously, the size of this thing is its point. The 1/5 scale Arrmas are already pretty big, even though they aren't true 1/5 scale. This thing's actually a little bit longer than a normal 1/5 scale truck, and it's definitely wider, and it handles pretty darn well, even though that steering servo is absolute crap. I'm not really surprised though. The stock servo probably isn't the best even for the stock car, and again, this thing weighs like 50% more than that. But yeah, it definitely does not want to turn, but that 12S Castle power system has got the power. It really likes to set up some rooster tails, balloon those tires. I think the center differential fluid's just about perfect, and these springs actually feel pretty good. They are very stiff, but again, this truck is pretty darn heavy, and I think if you're gonna build something like this, you're gonna need stiff springs. I don't think the stock springs are gonna work. Overall though, for what this thing is, how heavy it is, how big it is, it actually feels pretty darn nice. Obviously, this kind of sand and these bumps are no challenge for it whatsoever, and it sounds good, feels good, and is pretty controllable. I do have a little bit of AVC dialed in, but you probably don't need it for something like this. And yeah, this feels good. Let's see how it jumps. This truck is just about the same width as this little ramp, and I'm not trying to break anything just yet, so let's take it nice and easy. Yeah, didn't quite hit the whole ramp. I think this ramp's about 3 inches wider than the truck is, so getting all 4 tires on it is gonna be a challenge. Let's back up and try that one more time though. There we go. Yeah, it jumps okay. A little bit of a nose down attitude. I wasn't on the throttle when I went over it, more focused on just actually hitting the ramp. Let's try that one more time with a little bit more throttle. Yeah, that ramp's just not big enough, but I've got a bigger one. All right, we've got the big ramp. Let's see what this thing can really do. I really was struggling to aim at that small ramp, but this thing's quite a bit wider. Oh yeah, she's got some air. Lands pretty nicely too. These gold springs I got on Amazon are working pretty well. I suspect M2C is probably gonna need to include some kind of springs with their kit. Let's see if we can get a backflip. Okay, we don't quite have the wheel speed for a backflip, which means this thing definitely needs a bigger pinion gear. Even on 12S, we just don't have the gearing for it, but we should be able to get some good air out of it. I'm gonna try not to hit the arms too hard. With how heavy this thing is and having the stock arms, I suspect they're gonna be the thing that's gonna break if we break anything. Definitely gets some good air though, that's for sure. Yeah, we would definitely need to put a better steering servo in it, because this steering servo is terrible. I wonder if we can do a front flip. Oh, that was a hard hit. Still going though. I'm trying not to bust up this body too badly. This thing's actually a little bit too big for this backyard. But yeah, it does jump well, and the M2C pistons as well as the M2C shocks are really doing good work here. Try one more good jump. Yeah, she jumps well. You can feel it when it hits the ground though. It is quite the thump. Let's run it back. Yeah, we would definitely need a bigger pinion. I think we need to go 1-to-1 on the spur and pinion, even on 12S with this thing. Oh, right on the nose. Took that hit well. I don't expect the M2C parts to break. I'm also really excited to be sharing that M2C $250 giveaway with you guys. That'll really take the sting off of one of these kits. This thing is so big and so heavy. I've never had anything that felt like it was too big for this yard, and this definitely feels like it. One more nose hit from high up. Oh, let's take a look. Chassis still looks good. And again, I'm not surprised. This is not M2C's first rodeo. They had a previous kit that was a little bit shorter than this, but very similarly designed. And it was really, really strong. And I have no reason to believe this one won't be strong as well. I have heard they're working with one of the big aftermarket body companies to make a bigger body that you can buy with the kit. But to be honest with you, this Vigilante body is working really, really well. It didn't require too much modification, and it seems relatively durable. Overall, guys, yeah, this thing is a lot of fun, though it is very, very big. First of all, I have to say this thing is absolutely insane and a ton of fun. It is massive, it feels massive, it's very heavy, it feels very heavy, and it is a completely different experience even from the stock 8S Kraton. With all these upgrades, it is definitely a durable vehicle, especially for general regular bashing. The motor and motor mount held up just fine. Nothing here is loose at all. This rear brace definitely works, though I did notice we're getting a little bit of looseness in these arms, and I think these arms are going to be the weak point. On something like this, where we make the truck 50% heavier than it was stock, anything that's left stock is probably going to be a weak point. Another thing I found really interesting was how unwilling this thing was to rotate in the air. We could definitely go go up on pinion size, but not a ton. And I'm honestly not even sure that would matter that much. Maybe bigger, heavier tires would help, but the big problem is this is a long, very heavy car, and it has a lot of rotational inertia. That rotational inertia means it really wants to keep going the direction it's going when it gets into the air, and it's really not that hard to make minor corrections, but trying to get it to rotate all the way around, especially backwards, isn't very easy. With all that being said, this kit is awesome. Obviously, this thing's gonna be a tank with these M2C parts in it, and if you wanna make a real 1/5 scale Arrma with this motor and ESC in it, this prototype kit, when it comes to market, is gonna be what you need. However, this is very expensive. It's not gonna be for everyone. If you're the kind of person that wants this and is willing to spend the money on it, you already know who you are, but it is a serious investment in both time and money. You know what is free though? Entering to win that $250 gift card from M2C. All you have to do is put a comment down there, let me know what you think about this car, or any other comment. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that thumbs up, and then check out one of these videos.